All right, so if you look on our syllabus schedule, the schedule of topics that I want to really start to introduce, we really just got into Revit, obviously, on last Thursday, kind of just talking about the curtain wall and the adaptive component. But I want to start talking about how we can really start using these adaptive components and also curtain panels so that we can actually make kinetic panels, things that we can program and move. What you see on the screen here is just a kind of a solar study. Basically, these panels move up and down. They're folding panels that, depending on the time of the year and the angle, they either open and close, whether it's a heating part of the season or the cooling season. They either become kind of sunshades or they start letting light in throughout the day. But anyway, today what I want to focus on is the making of one of these panels, just kind of getting the idea of how we can use computational formulas to actually start to make our panels react the way that we want them to. Also, I want to kind of follow up a little bit more on the space frame truss. There's a couple things that we just kind of ran out of time at the very end, and I want to cover at the very beginning here, and then we'll get into this folding panel, and hopefully maybe even start to introduce Dynamo. We'll see, that might be a little aggressive, but basically what you see on the left of this screen is essentially a Dynamo script, and this is only an isolated portion of it. But that Dynamo script is really what's controlling what's happening over on the right in that animation. So I didn't have a chance to look at everybody's space frame and also all of your Connect panels that you've just turned in, so I'll start to do that. But were there any questions as you guys were working on your curtain panels and space frame? Yes?
I never could get the size A and B to turn back on. I went back into the components itself and did it, so I don't know why, and reloaded it using the project. I don't know where it goes.
And you can't, can you select, tab over and select it and then turn on and off?
It's just selecting the component piece, right? And it's not the size, it doesn't select that.
But off to the left, you should have some check boxes where you can turn things on and off. And if not, I can stop by after class and we can look at what that might be doing. Any other issues that people would come up with? Yes?
I also couldn't get my interior pipes to be 3 inches. I know we spoke about it afterwards, but I went back and did it, and it wouldn't let me select or drop down from the section.
Okay. I can also maybe follow up after class. But one thing I want to do today is I also told everyone to bring your pipe, your adaptive pipe component. Hopefully you got that email. If not, hopefully you have one of your files around. We're going to be using that today. And I want to also modify it to do something to talk about the scale of those components. So that'll start to actually address, is it Jeanette? Yeah, it'll start to address your, even the sizing of the 3-inch and 6-inch. I want to show another method that would actually scale it to look appropriate depending on how big, how far this pipe might span. Okay, so let's see here. One thing I want to show before I load up my file is, well, I always have to do this. My screen is slightly bigger. I think I do this at the beginning of every class and forget. Okay, so one thing that when you start working in Revit a lot, especially when you're in the office or even at home, I've got like millions of Revit files all over the place. And one thing that you'll start to notice as we work in Revit is that we have to open and close a lot of files, right? We have to open up a new template, we have to do some work in it, then we have to load it into another project or another family, and there's all these files that we really have to keep track of. And there's one thing that comes with Revit that's actually kind of nice, and you might want to utilize it when you start actually using Revit on your own computer, such as what I'm showing you here, is under the Applications menu, if you go to Options, there's this option to actually save file locations, basically kind of like a shortcut on your desktop, but now it's a shortcut that we can save within Revit that could point us to specific locations on our hard drive or wherever you might be working on a network. One thing I want to do is I haven't programmed my section of my computer for this particular fall class, so I want to go to File Locations, and there's this little button down here called Places. And when I go to Places, I've got all these different shortcuts set up for all the different places I work during the day. But I can add, if I click on Add Value, it basically adds a new line to this, and I can give it whatever name off to the left as kind of this library name. And I'm going to call this BIM Methods, because that's today's class or this fall's class. And if you click to the right, you can actually click into that kind of white space. And this is something you'll see often in Revit. When you click into the white space, there's a little button that appears off to the right. I can click on it, and now I'm going to browse to the location on my computer where I'm going to be saving all these files that I constantly work on, specific to this class. So I'm just browsing through my folders. Obviously, you won't have all these. But just as the example, I'm going to go to my UNCC folder and my fall semester, and then I might go to classes and kind of keep it at that. So every time I come in here, I basically have another folder for whatever we're working on for that class. Now all I'm going to do is hit open, and then OK again. All that does is next time I hit open or new or do a save as, I can now go to, so for instance, I'm going to go to open families. If I scroll down to the left on my dialog box, there's all these little shortcut icons. I've now added BIM methods down here. And when I click on it, it takes me automatically through that huge path that I had saved on my computer. So another thing I can do with this is I can left click on it and hold it down. And I'm going to drag it all the way to the top, just so I know that I can always find it at the top while I'm working. Just a really quick way to start to organize your files. As you get more and more in depth in Revit, that'll come in handy, but I wanted to show that while I could. I'm going to load back up, let's see, the space frame where I ended in last class. And one thing that, if you kind of recall at the end of the video, the one component that I was, let's see, get this docked over here. Pause it. So one thing I was a little bit disappointed with after this was created was that it looks real spindly, real small, because we had like 6-inch diameters and only 3-inch diameter pipes, and the scale that I decided to draw this format was pretty huge. So by the time you look at the scale of the overall and then what it looks like with just the 3-inch and the 6-inch pipe, it looks kind of off. It doesn't look correct like you would expect a structure of that size to look. Some of you might have had it look a little bit better because you probably had a smaller form, or you went back during the homework and you made a smaller form. But one thing I want to do is introduce what I'm going to talk about is the ability to make your pipes scale depending on the overall length that it happens to span. So I never have to physically go in and type in, well, I want this pipe to be 3 inches, or I want the other one to be 6 inches, and even some of you might have had that problem getting the pipe to change throughout the homework assignment. So what I want to do is, one thing, since I'm already in this file, is I can tab over my curtain panel and select it by just hitting the tab key a couple times and then left click. When I do that, it allows me to edit the family. So I can click Edit Family up here at the top. That will basically open up that file that we were working in. And then the other component I want to do is I want to click on that adaptive component, which is the pipe. And I also want to edit that family, because remember that was a family embedded within another. So I can select that one and hit Edit Family. That basically takes me all the way to where we really started out in last class, or you could have just opened up this pipe. But I want to have all these files kind of opened up together so that we can sort of update it as we go. Now if you remember, we have this radius that was tied to like a 3-inch diameter or a 6-inch diameter, and that was also tied to those profiles at the end. If I tab over the end profile, I'm making that radius equal to of that profile, something that I've already programmed within this family dialog box. I'm going to do is change here. What I want to do is I'm going to hit delete on the family types and only have one particular diameter set here. And I'm also going to rename this. I'm just going to call this variable pipe radius. Just the family types, this little icon up here to the left, top left, will bring you into this dialog box that I'm currently in. So it should look like that. There you go. And so all I did was I deleted the whether or not we had a 3-inch or a 6-inch diameter. And then I'm also going to take this radius parameter, and if you select it, I want to modify it. So I'm going to click Modify. And I'm also going to change it from a type radius to an instance. And I'll kind of explain that in a minute. You'll notice that when I do an instance, there's another option here to select a reporting parameter, and it has a little checkbox. Basically, the next step I'm going to do is create a reporting parameter, and only instance parameters can reference reporting parameters and so forth. So that's why I'm making this change, so that I can make the radius eventually relate to this reporting parameter. So I'm just going to select instance. I'm going to click OK. And you'll notice you'll have a, next to your radius now, it now says radius, and in parentheses it says default. You'll know that you have an instance parameter if your parameter happens to have that default in parentheses. So that's a good way to always know that. And then I'm just going to click OK. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create I'm actually going to select this pipe form. And I'm going to use the eyeglasses down at the bottom. And I want to hide that element so that basically all I do is reveal my reference line that I was originally working with. I'm going to now create a dimension. This dimension is going to be something that is going to have to relate to this reference plane. So kind of follow the steps here on screen a little bit. First, I'm going to click on Aligned Dimension. So that's this guy up here. You can get to that under Modify, and it should show up right there. Or you can also go to Create, and it also shows up there under Align Dimensions. But before I strike a dimension, I'm going to hit the Set button under Work Plane. So if you look up here, I want to hit Set. And then in my Options toolbar, or my Options bar down here, I have this option to, actually I don't, so I don't need to worry about that. I'm going to just hit Set, and I'm going to hover over my reference line, and you'll notice that it will highlight basically this big rectangle that goes around your reference line. I'm going to select that, and basically what I did there is I set this dimension to always be on that reference plane of that reference line. So that's all we're doing. And I'm going to snap to, I'm going to tab over until I can snap to the point, that end point, and then also this other end point. And basically I should have some kind of dimension string that I can pull off to the side. When you snap to each one, the next, I'll repeat that, the next thing that happens with the dimension string is it wants you to, basically place it somewhere on the screen. So I'm going to tab over until I can select that point. I'm going to have to zoom in. Then I'm going to tab over and select this other point. And then my next thing that I click on is going to left click somewhere on the screen. You can see I can pull out the dimension, and I'm just going to left click on it. Now if I were to take one of these endpoints, remember we had these endpoints that we made adaptive. Just as an example, I'm going to move this point around. And notice when I do that, my dimension changes. Basically what this is doing right now is it's just recording whatever length this line is ever going to be, is showing that information here on this dimension string. So what I can do is if I go back to my Family Types dialog box, I'm going to add a new parameter. I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. So I'm going to click on Parameters. I'm going to click on Add. And I'm just going to call this pipe length. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it an instance parameter, and this time I'm going to also check the box that says reporting parameter. You'll notice in parentheses it has all this verbiage under there, and basically all it's saying is when this is a reporting parameter, it can be used to extract a value from a geometric condition and report it so that it can be used basically in a formula or as in a schedule later on, if you choose. So if I click OK, and I'm going to click OK again, I'm going to now select this dimension, and here in the options toolbar, or the options bar of the screen under label, I'm going to make that equal to the pipe length report parameter. So basically what will happen, it will say pipe length, it says equals whatever your value might happen to be. And if you go back to your family types dialog box, you can now see that parameter that we created called pipe length is now actually inputting or reporting that information from the screen. Now, why that's significant is when we work in this environment, and we can go ahead and go back to your sunglasses down at the bottom and select Reset Temporary Hide Isolate. Why that reporting parameter is important is because when we work with those divided surfaces and also when we work with adaptive components, we're basically applying them to some form that has, a couple endpoints. Remember with the pipe, all we did was snap to a couple endpoints. And we never knew what that length of that pipe was going to be. It was just kind of already there on screen, and we went from start to end, and then it was some distance. When we're working with divided surfaces, remember we divided the surface, and you divided it so that it had equal parts of like 10 in the U direction, 10 in the V direction, and so on. You never know really how big that unit is going to be when you divide up that surface. But now with the reporting parameter, we can now extract the information and actually be able to use it so that we can scale things appropriately or do things with that particular element. Did you have a question? Anyone have any questions with getting the reporting parameter? Did you? Yeah. Mason.
I noticed when you had the family, what's it called?
The family types.
Yeah, the pipe length is grayed out. Is that because you have the instance, the reporting thing selected?
Right. So whenever you have a reporting parameter created, you'll notice that you can't click into that value and try to change it like you could perhaps the pipe radius. We could actually input some information. And that's because that's directly tied to whatever information it's reporting from the geometry. And so it's going to be grayed out, so it's only there as a kind of a visual cue of what it is. So now basically what I want to do here is I just want to use this reporting length to scale my pipe appropriately so that when it spans, let's say, if this pipe were to go 30 feet, it would be scaled and look correct on screen instead of being this little spindly 3-inch pipe that's going the full 30 feet, because that's just, it looks unrealistic. So I'm going to kind of come up with some kind of formula that's going to scale this based on the length. And we'll kind of play around with this for a moment because I'm kind of doing this one on a whim. So we'll kind of get it to look right. Let's see here. Make sure that's recording. All right, so if we go back to family types, one thing that's really great about this dialog box is we have this option. Last class we were inputting, an actual value off to the left here where it said value. But there's another column here where we can enter in formulas. So we can actually make computational mathematical equations to relate to other parameters so that we can start to make things, really relate to one another based on something that we want to program. So this radius pipe, I really want it to be scaled appropriately, and I'm going to kind of play around here for a moment. But we could start out by typing in pipe length, because I want to use the length that is reported from the geometry. And one thing that when we start using formulas and other parameters within formulas, you have to make sure of two things. One, you actually capitalize it, and if this is pipe length and you had it all lowercase, you want to make sure that it's all lowercase, when you're actually typing it in here. Also, the spelling has to be identical as well, because basically Revit needs to know that you're trying to get this pipe length. So if you misspell pipe length, you have to misspell it again here in the formula, or you can go back and try to fix it before you start using it over and over again. Did you have a question? Is it Raphael?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so pipe length. What I'm going to do is just come up with something here. Let's say pipe length times 0.125 to start out. That's way too big. I'm just trying to get something that might scale appropriately. And you'll notice that when I hit enter, it actually figured out that formula and entered in whatever value it is. So basically what it's saying there is if I use that value, that radius is going to be 1 foot 2 inches, which I think is a little extreme. So I might type in 0.005. Maybe too big, 0.5. Let's do that. Pipe length times 0.05. And the way I got times is, you got a question? You got an error?
Yeah, I got a box that pops up.
All right, let me look at that real quick. Everyone knows that the times is basically shift 8. It's the asterisk symbol is the mathematical symbol for times. And you've got a reporting parameter can be used in a formula only if its dimension references all the host elements in the family.
I got the same one.
You got the same thing? Anyone else get that? Okay, half of you got that. That is one of these great things that happen in Revit where we get these error messages where we have no idea what it's talking about. And I'm going to try to fix that here in a moment. That still looks a little too big. How about 0.03, and then I'll be happy. Yeah, that looks good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a save as of this before I continue. Because remember we made this as an adaptive component pipe. I'm going to call this adaptive component pipe variable radius, just to have a different, just so we don't overwrite things that we've already done in the past. So if we want to, we could use that component again. So the error message that it looked like maybe a third of you got is a error message that I'm not going to be able to recreate on the screen, but if you get an error message that basically says, by the way, your reporting parameter can only be used in a formula if it happens to reference geometry or some kind of verbiage like that. What that means is you did not snap to the point. You may have snapped to something else while you were making that dimension. So what you might want to do is delete the dimension on your screen. And then you want to make sure that when you go back in dimension and you've set your reference plane, remember we set the reference plane, that you make sure that you tab over, and if you look down at the bottom left of your screen, as you're tabbing over, it'll tell you what you're selecting. You want to make sure that you're selecting what's called the adaptive point when you snap to each side. So if I tab over, I can see in my lower left screen it says adaptive point. That's what I want to snap to make that dimension, and then I can make that a reporting parameter. So anytime you get that error message, if you see that, it's because you've snapped to something that was different than snapping to the actual adaptive point. Reporting parameters can only snap to reference planes. They can only snap to adaptive reference points. If you happen to snap to some kind of solid geometry, you'll always get that error message. So you might want to play around with that and see if that fixes your issue. And I'll kind of pause for a moment to kind of help you guys out. Let's see. So I'm going to actually delete this extra dimension I made because we don't need it. In the meantime, while I walk around, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load this pipe and I'm going to load it into my curtain panel. So my curtain panel space frame that I happen to have open. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select all of these pipes that are on my screen. Remember, they're the old ones. They're the ones that were actually where we could program 3-inch and 6-inch. And again, I'm doing this in the curtain panel, not in the space frame. So you want to make sure you just have that curtain panel open. And when I select all those pipes, if you look over to the left, I can actually go to the pull-down menu here, and I can select my variable pipe radius, and then it's going to update to that. And you'll notice that the size and the of the radius of the pipe changes, but it's all based on basically now a length. I'm going to save that. And while I walk around, I'm going to load in back into my space frame. I want to overwrite that version and see what happens. I may have to play around with that formula to get this thing to eventually look appropriate when it's scaled. But right now it's thinking, basically it's going through and overriding all those curtain panels, and it's calculating each length and trying to figure out what that radius should be. So it might take a little minute here. I'll go ahead and pause. Okay, I don't know if anyone noticed, but at least on mine, when you look at the screen, you see how the pipe scaled up, and it looks a little bit more realistic per the size that it's at. Some of you have said, well, it didn't really change on mine. It depends on what your overall scale was of your grid. But you can, if you don't like the way that it's scaled, all you have to do is go back and change that formula. So, right now I had pipe length times what I ended up with, like 0.03 or something. If you want it bigger, then you just say 0.06 or whatever. You just keep making the number bigger until you get a kind of a happy scale that you want to work with. Yep.
So I've done everything, but every time I try and write the formula and apply it, it gives me this message.
Change your radius, hit cancel on that. Your radius, click on that, hit modify under parameters, and make sure that that is an instance parameter. Yep. Instance parameters can only relate to instance parameters. So since the reporting parameter is an instance, it has to also, the radius parameter has to also be an instance as well. Now another question I had was, some of you applied your space frame. And by the way, I could also do the same thing, and I'm not going to do it right now because I want to move on. But I could also, you notice my space frame, kind of the depth of the curtain panel. Might want that to be a little bit deeper, like 8 feet, just for now. But I could also make that space frame depth also some kind of formula. Remember, that's a thing that we can manually change. And then I could also make that relate to some kind of reporting parameter that would be part of the curtain panel, where I could measure what the curtain panel is, and then I could say, well, if the sides are 10 feet, then maybe the space frame depth should be half of that. I'm not going to do that right now. We can expand on that actually with the folding panel exercise. As soon as this changes, I want to do one last or two more things to the space frame, and then we can move on. Of course, it takes a little bit of time here to... The other question I had was, some of you brought in your space frame, and you notice mine, the depth is pointing down on the on this particular form. And some of you mentioned that when you brought in your space frame, the actual depth pointed up, and you wanted to know how to switch that. If you select, I can select this divided surface. Look to the left on the screen here. Under properties, when you select your divided surface, you have other options where you can change the pattern application. Under pattern application, I can indent. I'm not going to get into that. I can rotate the component. I can mirror the component, and I can also component flip. If I hit component flip, basically it's going to flip the direction of my space frame, and it's going to make it so that everything is going to point up now instead of pointing down. So if you had the opposite, everything was pointing up, you can just hit component flip, and now everything will go ahead and flip down. Yeah, I was going to say the question was, what causes it to go up or down? I've noticed in essentially working in Revit, it all depends on the point and its reference plane. So you know how we related everything to a point. And for the life of me, every time I've done everything, it's guesswork. It always seems to go up or down, and I can never find the rhyme or reason, and I'm still trying to figure that out. So it's kind of a trial and error thing at the moment. If it goes the wrong way, you just flip it. There's probably a better way to do that, and I'll try to get better research on that part. But I've been doing that for many semesters, and you just kind of trial and error. And it's going to happen today, too, when we do our folding panel. Whenever I do an offset off of a point, my offset on one side will go up, and the offset on the other is going to go down, and all I do is make a negative number to fix it. So this should change here in a minute, hopefully, and we can move on. Last thing I want to do is put the little sphere connectors onto our space frame. Remember that I had that on my the project I showed you, or the file I showed you at the end of class or beginning of class last time. So to do that, I'm going to flip back into our curtain panel, and I'm also going to select all of these pipes, and I'm going to use the sunglasses or the eyeglasses down below. They're eyeglasses when nothing's hidden, and then when I hit hide element, they change the sunglasses. I don't know if you noticed that, but that's what happens. So I'm going to basically hide those elements so that I can work with and actually just see the endpoints. I'm going to go to View, User Interface, Recent Files. I'm going to open up a new family, and I'm going to open up a generic model adaptive. So we worked with that last time. So again, new family. I can go generic model adaptive, and I'm going to click Open. All I'm going to do in this file is I'm going to make a point. Doesn't matter where it is. I'm just going to place it. And I'm going to click on that point and make it adaptive. So basically, you should just have one point. It's adaptive, and that's it. I'm going to do a save as of this. Generic model adaptive. Scroll down a little bit. Yep, there you go. And then I'm going to call this... Let's call this sphere connector. Now I'm going to show you quickly the hard way to make a sphere, and then I'm going to show you the easy way. And I'm just showing you the hard way because the hard way actually allows you to do other things in the near future. To make a sphere in Revit, it's not that all intuitive. But if I click on line, and I'm just going to draw this, let's go ahead and go into a floor plan. It'll make it easier. Just draw a line, doesn't matter where on your screen, and I'm just going to draw a line vertical. I'm now going to take my center ends arc tool, which is the second one on the middle row. I'm going to click on the center point, and then I'm just going to make a radius, kind of a half semicircle, and make sure you don't click to the ends of the line. Just make sure you're making the semicircle slightly less than basically the axes or the line that we've got there. Now if we look at this in 3D, see where I drew that, there it is, it's going to be a big guy. If you have a line that extends beyond whatever shape that you might make. So I didn't have to make a circle. I could have made some kind of squiggly line or whatever. But if I select each of these and hold in the control key and hit create form, it'll make a revolve. It'll essentially make a sphere occur around that. Now what I like about the hard way, which I just showed you there, is that it has a start, when you select that sphere once it's made, it has a start angle and an end angle, and automatically it goes to 360. But I could type in 225 for my end angle, and it'll kind of start to cut away and not do a complete revolve. So you can kind of get these other shapes out of that if you want. One thing that I want to show again with that, instead of doing a sphere, if I were to draw another vertical line, and let's say I do a squiggly line with a kind of that spline tool. Yes?
When I click create form, I get something different.
Because you snap to the end points, you need to make sure that that line extends beyond the end points. So tab over that, tab, select, now drag those endpoints away. Yeah, and that'll do it. If you don't get a sphere, it's probably because you made your half circle snap to the ends of that axis. And remember, the axis has to extend beyond. So real quick, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select my squiggly line and this other axis, and I'm going to hit create form. I can now get a little vase shape. So you can start to see you can get a lot of different ways of making shapes by doing that little revolve command. All right, so that's kind of the hard way, but the reason I showed you the hard way is so that you can make a hard or a more complex form, kind of like this vase, later on, if you ever choose to. For now, I'm going to delete those. And because all I need is a sphere, I'm going to click Insert. So click Insert at the very top of your menu. And I'm going to click on Load Family. If I load family, Revit comes with all kinds of families that are already embedded within it that you can choose to use from time to time, and I do, depending on what we're doing. But if you scroll down to where it says Mass, I'm going to double click into that, and I should be able to find a sphere that's already been made for me, and I can click Open. Now, I need to associate that sphere with my adaptive point. So just like we did with our pipe profile radius, I'm going to click Create. I'm going to click on Component, and where it says Placement Plane in the options bar, I'm going to hit Pick, and I'm going to pick the plane of that adaptive point, and then I'm going to snap to the center. Basically, all that does now is wherever I move this point, that sphere goes to. All right, last thing. I've got that sphere. They've already, what? All right. Has everybody gone to Insert, Load Family, go to Mass, and make sure you load in a sphere? I'm going to click Open. Now I'm going to click on Create, then Component, because I want to place the sphere. I've got it selected. I also want to click on Placement Plane. I'm going to click on Pick, and I want to pick one of the horizontal planes of that adaptive point, and then I'm going to snap to the center of that point. And you should know that you've done that correctly. If you select that point and drag it around, your sphere should be going with it. Click on Create Component, and then you've got your sphere. Now go to Pick. Under your placement plane, make sure you go to Pick, and then pick that. Yep. Tab over, and now snap to the center. There you go. So everyone should have a sphere on your screen, and that's the easy way to do it, but that's also, you cannot control it. It's always going to be a sphere. If I ever wanted to control the start and end angles, I'd have to do my own sphere that we just made. But I don't need that. I just need the connector piece. But the last thing that's already programmed into this is a radius. But I want that equal to a radius I can control. So I'm going to go to Radius. I'm going to click on that button, and we're going to add a parameter called Radius. Let's make it an instance and click OK and OK. Now just for a default, I'm going to go back to the family types, and instead of being a 15-foot radius, let's go ahead and make it like 6. Let's make it like 6 inches. We'll hit Save, and then I'm going to load this into our curtain panel. And now it wants us to place it once I hit Load into curtain panel. I'm just going to go around, and I'm going to snap to all of those endpoints. And I'm also going to do it down at the bottom here. So I basically put a sphere at all of the endpoints. And I'm also going to select all of those spheres once I've placed them. And now I'm going around and I'm actually selecting each one and holding in the control key. We can actually right-click on a sphere, and you get this option that says select all instances in entire project, and it'll select all the spheres. What I want to do is make all of those spheres have a radius. Right here where it says radius, I'm going to click on that button, and I want to give a radius parameter within this curtain panel that I can control. And let me just reveal all of my forms again. I'm going to come around and help everybody out. Hold on. I'm going to type in this radius. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to load this into my space frame just so that I can get that going while I step around. All right, who's got questions? All right. All right, couple things is some of you have your spheres floating off into space somehow. That's what I'm going to look at how to correct. We're running out of time. We're not going to get to folding panels today. I get this error message when I loaded everything into my space frame. It says there are identical instances in the same place. All that error message is saying is because I have spheres on every single corner. This is just like the pipe, remember? I have spheres on every single corner, and because of that, they're going to overlap from repeated component from repeated component. So remember last class, we made a yes-no parameter to turn on and off pipes. To avoid that, it's not really an error message, it's just a warning. Another thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to change my radius of my spheres so I can actually see them. Anyway, what we'd want to do is in each of the corners, we would select each of the spheres, and we can make a new parameter called show sphere 1, sphere 2, sphere 3, 4, and so on, and we could keep them all off except for one, and then when it repeats across the whole entire curtain panel, then when it gets to the ends, we could just modify the ones that we want. And I'll go over that right now just so we have a good understanding of that before we, actually next class we'll probably get into the, looks like the folding panel. Let's take a little minute here to load up. I'm going to address that issue where some of you have your sphere floating off into space. I think it has to do with a way of selecting your work plane, and I'm going to. You still have yours floating off into space? Mm-hmm. Let's experiment on yours real quick. I'm going to go back into my sphere. I'm going to try to recreate the error that some of you are getting because it's about half the class. If I load, I'm going to do a save as of this. If I load this one into my project, my curtain panel, and I try to place, notice where my sphere is. See my point is up to the left. My sphere is all the way down to the right. Looks like a lot of you are getting that. There's one step that will fix that, is if you go back into your sphere, click on that center point. You need to make sure that it's an adaptive point. So hit make adaptive. You'll notice an adaptive point because it'll say number 1 once you make it adaptive. Now if I load that back into my project and override it, hit create component to place it. Now wherever I click, my sphere should be there. So those of you that were having that issue, all of you had the same common thing that it wasn't an adaptive component, so that should fix it.
What did you do different that kept it from doing that?
I made my point adaptive before I placed the sphere. So I think maybe some of you had missed that step or didn't click on that. Looking at my curtain panel or space frame here, remember I had all that identical, that message that said I had identical spheres everywhere. So to alleviate that problem and also to make your model run more efficiently so that it doesn't use up so much RAM and memory while you're working, especially when we get more complex, is when I go back to my curtain panel space frame, I want to click on, I'm going to do this by turning on a wireframe view. Notice how I've got numbers. Might be hard to see, but I do, each of these points where my sphere is has a number. All I'm going to do is I'm going to select that sphere where it says visible. I'm going to click on that button, and I'm going to make a parameter here that says show sphere 1. I'm going to make that an instance parameter, and I'm going to click OK. This is kind of a repeat of what we did at the end of last class with the pipes. If I zoom in on my other side here, this point is number 4. It actually says number 4 on it. So my parameter I'm going to make here when I select that sphere is I'm going to hit that button next to visible. I'm going to say show sphere 4, and I want to make that an instance. All I'm going to do is go around to all of these. This next one here is number 3. Hit visible, and I'm going to say show sphere 3 instance. And the last one here should be number 2. So I went the counterclockwise or whatever from what it was numbering. I'm going to go here to visible. I'm going to click on the parameter button, and I'm going to call this show sphere 2. Make that an instance. And now in my family types dialog box, all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all of them except for sphere 1, so that when it loads into the next project, hit save here, it's only going to show the one corner, which means I'm not going to get identical instances everywhere. But then I'm going to have to eventually go around and do what we did at the end of your assignment, was to select the ones that were missing the spheres or the pipes and toggle those buttons on and off. And while this is loading, I'll step around one more time, answer questions. Yes?
So if in the space frame panel, if all the spheres technically have the same number, as long as we label them something different, it's just basically going to be the same thing.
Yeah, I only chose 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 just to correspond to the point. You could call it A, B, C, or D.
Well, that's what I meant. Like, all the points are labeled as 1 on there. And I don't know if that'll have an issue.
All of yours are 1?
Yeah. Oh, wait.
In parentheses, it
Never
should...
mind, it was the sphere that was selected as 1. Never
Okay,
mind.
yep.
Just kidding.
There you go.
My spheres are too small in my final
Yep.
curtain panel.
So I'm going to show how to go through, and we can actually change that right there in the space frame model. And so as soon as mine continues loading, I'll go over that too, because mine are still kind of small as well. So if you wanted to change your sphere, we're going to do it in 2 methods because we have a little bit of time here, since I'm going to keep focusing on the space frame. One way to change our sphere is I'm here in the space frame, and I think my sphere is still a little bit too small for all the little connected pipes that are happening. What you can do is actually in this file, if you go to your project browser, expand the part of the project browser that says families. If you expand that, you should be able to find the section here called curtain panels. If I expand that, I can find my curtain panel space frame, that file that you've been working with. Expand that one more time, and it will show you some text that's below it. It will be probably the same name, curtain panel space frame. If you double left click onto that, that will bring up the dialog box of your space frame or that curtain panel where you can see my space frame depth and my radius parameter that I could actually change. So you can actually physically, instead of going all the way back into the curtain panel and making the changes, you can actually physically change it right now within here. So, but since we have a little bit of time and we were really introduced today the whole idea of that reporting parameter and doing computational formulas, let's take that a step further to our sphere. And then also I want to update my depth per what I was talking about earlier in class, where I can get my depth to always be the whatever the half the length of the curtain panel is. So that looks correct as well. One last thing I want to do, I'm just going to flip my space frame back so it looks correct. And I'll give you guys a chance to catch up or to take a breather. Any questions so far?
Aren't you supposed to be able to load the original, like if you change the original sample, load it back into it and it'll overwrite them?
Mm-hmm.
It's not doing the
Well,
override.
that's just because.
Okay. So let's just expand a little bit more on reporting parameters as it relates to this curtain panel. The reason I'm doing that is, let's see, somehow I got upside down. Let's see, there we go. Is that, remember I did the reporting parameter for the pipe so that my pipe radius is going to change based on the overall length. But right now we have to hard code in the size of the sphere. So I'm never going to know how big the pipe is until it's placed, and then I have to individually each time change my sphere radius to look appropriate as well. Well, we might as well just tie those all together so that we can, just change the sphere or have it change automatically as well. Same thing with the depth. So what I want to do is I'm going to go into the curtain panel again, and let's select everything on the screen. So I'm back at the curtain panel. I selected everything. I'm going to go to filter up here at the top. I'm going to hit check none. Then I'm going to select reference lines, reference points, and adaptive points. Basically, I guess I could have just unchecked generic models. That would have been easier. So uncheck generic models and click OK. Now if we go down to our eyeglasses, I want to isolate those elements. Basically, I just want to be able to see the wireframe again with the adaptive components or the points. Now, just like we did with the pipe, I'm going to make a reporting parameter that determines how big this curtain panel is. So I'm going to do the same exact steps that we just did at the beginning of class. Some of you aren't at this step. What do you guys need help with?
What do you check?
Huh?
What do you check?
Uncheck generic models. Click OK. Then go to your eyeglasses and say isolate element. Who else is behind? All right, how can I get you guys caught up? Or do you just want to watch?
Well, I was trying to do the thing for the spheres, like labeling them.
Uh-huh.
So I haven't got past labeling them.
Okay.
But yeah, we're both there.
Okay, so let's not worry about the labeling part. That's something we can add in after these steps. So you guys can actually select everything like I just did in your curtain panel and go to filter up on the top right. And then I unchecked generic models. Then go to your eyeglasses and then hit isolate element. So basically everyone should basically just have their reference planes and then these points. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on our aligned dimension. So we're kind of repeating what we did at the beginning of class. I'm going to click set for my work plane. And I'm just going to pick one of these edges. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to pick this edge over here, the top left. I'm going to select that reference plane. And then I'm going to snap my dimensions. Remember, I got to snap to those points, the adaptive points. And I'm going to pull out a dimension. So the same exact stuff we did with the pipe. Make sure you snap to the adaptive points. Now I'm going to click on family types.
When I do that, it doesn't look like it's coming out of.
All right.
Is that the same alignment problem?
I'm going to repeat this because it looks like. All right. I'm going to repeat these steps one more time. Go to Align Dimension. You want to hit Set on the work plane, and you want to hover over and select one of the reference lines, not any of the points. So it hovers over, you get this little rectangle basically around your reference line. Then I'm going to select each of the points and drag off a dimension. Now let's go to Family Types, the dialog box, and we're going to do a couple things. Where it says Space Frame Depth, select that and hit Modify. We need to change that to an instance. This radius that I have here, I actually need to, I'm going to modify that. I'm going to call that Sphere Radius because that's really what that's referencing. And I'm also going to make that an instance and click OK. I'm going to add another parameter here, and I'm going to call this Sphere Radius B and make that an instance. All right, I'll zoom in here so everyone can see what we have here. So all of your sphere radius, space frame depth, and sphere radius B should all be a default, should be a instance parameter. I'm going to add another parameter here, and I'm going to call this length 1. And I'm going to not put a space there. I'm just going to put length 1. Make that an instance and reporting. Click OK. And since I made a length 1, I also want a length 2. So I'm going to go to length 2, and then instance reporting, and click OK. All right. Then two things here. And we're almost done. This one, that dimension we already have, if you select it, I'm going to go to Label, and I'm going to make that the reporting parameter for length 1. This offset that we have, I'm going to select each of those points, that midpoint and the offset point. And I want to do a spline through points, and I'm going to make that a reference line. The reason for that is I want to set up another dimension. So I'm going to do one more. This will be length 2. So I'm going to hit Align Dimensions and select Set. I'm going to select that reference line that we just drew. And then I'm going to make my dimensions from each of those points. That dimension we can make a reporting dimension length 2. All right, if you're not here, just kind of follow along. I'm going to wrap it up, and then you guys can kind of go back on the video for part of the homework. I'm going to go to reset all of my temporary elements here. And I'm going to do the following. Remember, all of my spheres right now are related to that radius parameter that says sphere radius. I'm going to do one more here, the one down at the bottom. I'm going to change that radius and make that equal to sphere radius B. Can't make, oh, because it's already set to 0. Give sphere radius B something. So I'll do 6 inches for now. And then I can switch it. The reason I'm doing B, or that one differently, is if you look at your space frame, your perimeters are a lot bigger in kind of the pipe radius dimension than these kind of interstitial ones that go down to that space frame depth. Yes?
When I try to change that sphere radius, it says can't make type sphere character.
Right, so that's the same error I got. You need to go into family types, and where it says sphere radius B, you need to make sure that has a dimension greater than 0. Otherwise, it can't make it. All right, so I'm going to do a couple things here real quick, and then we'll end the class. Okay, so space frame depth is going to be something fairly easy. I'm going to make a formula here that measures from length 1. I'm going to divide it by 2. That'll always make my space frame depth half the distance of the overall, width and length of my space frame. So that one was easy. Space frame radius, the first one, that's going to be the very big, basically at all the corners, the 4 corners of the space frame. That one I also want to relate to length 1 in some fashion. So I'm going to do length 1, and let's say times, and it looks like the scale that I have right now on my screen, if I move that around, that 8-inch looks about right for the scale that's right here. So I'm going to try to get this length 1 equal to that somehow. So I'll do times, let me just, I could probably come up with better, so I could do times. There we go. Times 0.067 for some reason seems to get close to 8. That's good enough for me. I'll click OK. That should change the depth and also change that one. Now I want this one, this is B, I want it to be related more to the length of the depth, just to give it a smaller radius or smaller sphere radius than all the others. So I need to go back to my family types. We'll make that one length 2. Let's see what that one will come out to if it's the same. There's that error message. I didn't snap to the right things. So for the sake of get this to work right, I'll make it work to length 1. And I'll just make this a smaller value there, 0.037. That error message, that was the one I talked about at the class where I need to go back and, if I zoom back out, this length 2 parameter, I need to make sure I'm snapping to the right value. So I might actually snap to, I should have taken the measurement off of this line and snap to that point and that point maybe. That would have helped that. But for now, that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to hit save, and I can load that into my space frame. And everything should kind of scale more appropriately, hopefully when I'm done here. And then I can go back and turn on and off the different space frame spheres and connectors. So not quite what I was going to do, but I think it's still important that we worked through all of that because there's a lot of things that were still part of that space frame that I wanted you to get to. And that's fine because it's still everything that we did today is still going to relate to what we're going to do on Thursday, which is going to be that folding panel. Your homework assignment between now and Thursday is to make sure your curtain panel is set up exactly like mine, where you can turn off the spheres. You can apply it to your space frame that you already turned in, and you need to go around and turn on and off the spheres that need to be turned on and off, just like you did with the pipe. So you complete your space frame. So it looked like basically what I had at the end of that one class, last class. I want you to upload that, and also make sure you've caught up to where you guys kind of just watched at the very end. Make sure you get those additional steps in there so that it will work, and then upload your space frame component. In the meantime, I'm going to look at all the homework assignments that you turned in, especially your kinetic panel, and kind of get an idea of what you guys are interested in making, and we'll go from there. All right? I can stick around for questions, and I'll get this to show up here at the end. So at the end of class, I just want to do a quick little follow-up here. I couldn't get the length 2 to work out as a reporting parameter. And one of the things that I did mention in class, but just want to reiterate, and I didn't follow my own rule or Revit's rules, is that anytime we do reporting parameters, they can only be hosted to elements of the family template. So all of these adaptive points, 1, 2, 3, 4, were part of this curtain panel pattern-based family. So I can reference those all I want, but I can't create new points because those are just reference points and they aren't adaptive, and I can't make this reporting parameter work correctly. So what I'm going to do is just hit delete. And these points can't be made into adaptive points because we're not in that family. Remember, we're just in a curtain panel pattern-based family. So the dimensions that I'm going to utilize remember at the end of class, I made this one length 1 is times 0.037. I can actually just make this some kind of, this radius is always going to be smaller than the other spheres that are around it, because remember, these spheres are probably going to be a little bit larger if you can look at the way that the layout works. And these pipes are a little bit smaller. All I want to do is get that pipe or that sphere a little bit larger than these pipes coming in. So I'm just going to make this turn on a magnifier here. I'll just make this a formula that says sphere radius, and we'll say times 0.75. Let's just always make it a little bit smaller than what the other spheres will always be, and then that will work out for now. When we talk about folding panels, like I have been alluding to, we will be doing all of that in an adaptive generic model family, so we can make all of our adaptive points and we can actually extract any of our reporting parameters that we want in the near future. So for now, just go ahead and make a length 1, make those spheres happen per those formulas, and then you can just make this sphere related, basically scaled down to the other sphere radii. I'll zoom in at the end here just so you can see what I ended up doing, and you can pause the video or whatever you want and kind of see what those formulas should be, and that's all we need to do for now to get that to look right.